speculating about how these two justices will see the next couple of years as an ideal time to retire and secure their legacies, given that Senate Republicans now have the power to confirm their successors and don't need any help from Democrats to do that. Alito is 74 years old. There's some more eyes on him lately than Clarence Thomas, who's a little bit older, but he's also a few years off from setting the record as the longest-serving Supreme Court justice in history. There's some talk about maybe he wants to set that record before he goes. But regardless, if Trump gets to replace these two, he will have, as you just pointed out, picked a record 5 justices, I should say a record since FDR, since the existence of the 2-term limit for a president. And it wouldn't shift the balance of the Supreme Court. That's important to know. It would still be 6-3 because these are conservative justices, but it would make it much, much harder and force Democrats to wait a lot longer to have any hope of cutting into that 6-3 majority.
It could be 20 more years of conservative rule, if not more, on the Supreme Court. There's a report right now, as we've been speaking, Sahil, that Senator J.D. Vance, the Vice President-elect, is on Capitol Hill. This was confirmed by a Senate-side spokesperson. Any idea what he could be doing there?
He is actually downstairs, one floor from where I'm standing right now, in his Russell Senate office building. We don't have full details on what he's doing. He is, of course, the vice president-elect. He's currently still the senator from Ohio until he's sworn in to that job on January 20th. What he's doing, his team is holding their cards close to the vest on this one. One interesting question is going to be whether Senator Vance has any thoughts on the leadership race. Senate Republicans are going to elect a new leader. Does he want John Thune? Does he want John Cornyn? Does he want Senator Rick Scott, who is a long shot, more MAGA-aligned challenger? Is Donald Trump going to weigh in? These are the questions, among others, that we have for him if we see him.
All right, Sahil, thank you very much. Joining us now to keep talking about the courts, senior writer at Slate, Mark Joseph Stern, Washington Post senior national political correspondent and MSNBC political analyst Ashley Parker, and staff writer at The New Yorker and author of The Letter from Trump's Washington, Susan Glasser. Everybody welcome. All right, Mark, I'm going to begin with you. The court's your specialty. If Donald Trump gets 2 more, say he gets 2 more, and it's a safe bet that the 2 conservatives, most conservative justices are the oldest on the Supreme Court, they could step aside. Who might Donald Trump replace them with?
So I think it's very likely that if Alito steps down, Trump will replace him with a judge on the 5th Circuit named Andrew Oldham. Oldham was a clerk for Alito. It is becoming a tradition to replace justices with their former clerks. And perhaps more importantly, Oldham has proved himself to be an extreme kind of MAGA conservative. He has authored or joined some very far-reaching rulings against abortion, against immigration, against the environment, regulations, you name it. He has been auditioning for this seat, and I think that he has proved that he will be loyal to the Trump agenda. For Clarence Thomas, I think there's a kind of similar man in waiting on the 5th Circuit, Judge James Ho. He has taken the role of a kind of troll in robes. He often uses extremely provocative language in his opinions that seems designed to own the libs. He has developed a fan base among the conservative legal movement and Trump's own community of, someone who would not pull punches, who would join the court and very aggressively enact an agenda that perfectly aligns with, Project 2025 and everything Trump has promised for a second term.
Well, let me ask you about that agenda. What would be on the table?
I mean, look, Katie, sky's the limit. Come on. They have started a revolution, but they're really just at the beginning of it. There are already cases pending that would destroy a bunch of federal agencies, including the National Labor Relations Board, make it impossible for them to bring any kind of enforcement action. There are cases teed up to try to test the existing limits of campaign finance restrictions to allow billionaires and corporations to donate unlimited amounts of money to candidates. There are challenges to many of Biden's signature achievements, including the Inflation Reduction Act, elements of the tax reforms, and efforts to make it no longer legal for the government to negotiate over drug prices for Medicare. That is a 5th Circuit case that has been teed up as a test for this Supreme Court. So I think it's quite possible that in addition to continuing the conservative agenda that we've gotten used to, we're going to see a court that's eager to roll back a lot of the reforms that Biden was actually able to enact into law.
There's not just that. I mean, this Supreme Court, Susan, has already made it so that the president is immune from most things. I mean, completely immune when he's talking or they're talking to their Justice Department, the DOJ, the AG, presumed to be immune when they're talking to their vice president. I mean, they've already given Donald Trump a lot of leeway. If now that Donald Trump's going to be back in office, what is that leeway from the Supreme Court going to allow?
Yeah, I think this is an extremely important question, Katie. Obviously, even when Donald Trump was president, the first time he took a very sweeping, although sometimes legally untested, view of the powers inherent in the presidency. He would often brag, as he did in the summer of 2019, essentially that the Constitution, Article 2, gives me the power to do anything I want. And it will be a brutal irony of ironies if one of the major legacies of the Biden administration's efforts to hold Donald Trump accountable for January 6th results not in Donald Trump's conviction for his actions in seeking to overturn the 2020 election, but in further empowering him, because this immunity case that you mentioned was brought by Trump in the effort to counter those Biden prosecutions of him. So I just think that, you know, this is the cruelest kind of defeat in a way for the Biden administration. Not only have they not succeeded in even bringing Trump to trial on charges stemming from his actions after 2020, but they may have produced the Supreme Court precedent that will empower him to be a very unchecked president with a very radical and extreme agenda.
So they have the vacancies in the lower courts, 47 as of right now. The Democrats will likely eat into some of those vacancies, but not all of them. One of the things that the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025, wants to do is to use the Comstock Act to enforce an abortion ban nationwide. So it's not one that Donald Trump would have to go to Congress to enforce. It would be one where they use existing laws on the books to stop the transfer, the transport of abortion-related medical equipment, et cetera, across state lines. This is a Supreme Court, Mark, I'll give this one to you. Is this a Supreme Court that would allow Donald Trump to use the Comstock Act?
I really think it is. I think that providers of abortion in blue states and red states are going to face prosecutions under the Comstock Act. This is a statute that was enacted like 150 years ago.
1873.
In a fit of puritanical panic about women's rights. And a different kind of court would say that it reflects a kind of animus toward women, that it was from a different time, that it should not be interpreted so broadly. But that's not this court. This is a court that will say, we just apply the plain text of the law and Congress's will. And, you know, in 1873, Congress didn't think that women should have any rights, not a right to read feminist literature, not a right to birth control, certainly not a right to abortion. So I think it is very likely that Trump's Justice Department will bring these prosecutions and that the Supreme Court may well uphold a very far-reaching interpretation of the Comstock Act that at a bare minimum makes it nearly impossible to acquire medication abortion, possibly procedural abortions as well.
Donald Trump has walked back the support of a federal ban on abortion. I mean, he said that he's tried to be both ways on the fact that Roe v. Wade was overturned, but he said ultimately that it's up to the states. It's a states issue. He wouldn't sign a federal abortion act. And when I've talked to a source close to him, this person has repeatedly told me over the years and recently that Donald Trump's personal stance on abortion is not as conservative as you might think from some of the people that he has around him. Is there any reason to believe that Donald Trump as president might not want to pursue these sorts of things, Ashley?
Well, it's interesting. A number of voters believe what you just articulated, Katie, and what this person close to the president-elect told you, which is that sort of his heart and his passion is not really in restricting reproductive rights the way, say, his former vice president Mike Pence sort of truly believe that is a guiding conviction and principle. What's interesting in, sort of reporting I did on how Trump got to deciding that this should be left to the states was his team put together a memo that was that had nothing to do with ideology and when he believes, you can no longer have an abortion, nothing like that. It was based on pure electoral politics, where they presented him with a map And they showed him, for instance, the blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and told them what the current laws were on the books, and said that if you support a federal ban, the Democrats and the media will paint you as restricting and rolling back abortion rights in these states, and that will hurt you politically. He's now won. That political calculation no longer matters. So there's a world in which he might be more susceptible to pressure from some of the people in his orbit, like, say, a Kellyanne Conway, who had been pushing for a 16-week federal ban. But there's also, again, the belief that you articulated that this isn't something he's particularly passionate about. And by the same token, now that he's won, he no longer has to, sort of placate that sort of base, and he can do what he wants.
I wonder, though, the folks around him are much more conservative, and if he's looking at judges, he's relied in the past on the Federalist Society, very conservative. Clarence Thomas, I'm going to bring this back up, said in the overturning of Roe v. Wade, in an opinion of his own, that he thinks that the court should probably revisit the bans on contraceptives and maybe even the ban or even the ruling to allow gay marriage. Do you have any, or what would Donald Trump do on those two things? Do we have any insight into where his head is at on gay marriage or on contraception? Ashley.
Well, again, the thing that's challenging about this is there is a belief, and this has been borne out in the past, that Donald Trump, sort of at his core and his personal convictions, sort of being before this a Manhattan impresario, having a club, Mar-a-Lago, that famously down in Palm Beach was one of the first clubs to welcome gay members, is sort of not that socially conservative in his bones. But the flip side, as we both know, having covered him for as long as we have, is that Donald Trump is incredibly susceptible to whoever is surrounding him, to the last person he's spoken to. And often in that push and pull between moving a little more to the center, where he may naturally be and where he frankly sometimes has the ability to bring his base, who will never abandon him, and then the outcry that some of those moves cause, online, on the far right, on the conservative, cable news networks he watches, he almost always retreats to where that conservative base is. So some of this is just unknowable for someone who sort of is so impetuous and is often swayed by the last person in the room.
Test the uncomfortable alliance that his base now comprises. I mean, you have like the Barstool Sports guys, and then you have the J.D. Vance version of, male conservatism. And I don't imagine that the Barstool Sports guys are going to want to get behind a contraception ban, maybe in the same way that others within the coalition might want to. There's ideological differences there, and I just wonder, Susan, if you're thinking about this, where might Donald Trump fall on this? Who might he be listening to? If it is just the Federalist Society, I would imagine he'd be going in a much more conservative direction, just, throwing his hands up and allowing them to do what they want.
Yeah, I mean, look, remember that Congress is going to have at least one and possibly quite likely both houses controlled by Republicans. They are a completely anti-abortion majority of Republicans in both the House and the Senate. There's almost no ideological diversity on this question. And in fact, in Congress, the question is, how many different ways can we go after restricting women's reproductive rights? And that's what you're going to see from the magnified House Republican conference. And they're going to be sending out bills to Donald Trump. They may only have 2 years of unified Republican government. The question then will be, will Donald Trump sign those bills? So I don't think that the Barstool, sports guys, that they get